Money is important, but your safety is much more important. And keeping your children from attacking each other is far more important than just the transfer of money.
Welcome to The Keys to Your Legacy with your host, Elijah Keys.
Hi, thank you everyone for joining us. This is the Keys to Your Legacy podcast, where we talk about issues related to estate planning and trust and estates. Today, I am joined by Hong Yoo.
Yeah, I'm a director here.
So Hong, how are you today?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Today's a great day. You know, I try to say that today's a great day just because I follow a book called The Happiness Advantage. Have you ever heard of that book before?
No, I'm slowly getting into the business books. Any recommendations are definitely.
It's a good one. The Happiness Advantage. It's a really good one. So nice to see you, Hong. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh no, thanks for having me. Yeah.
So what is Redwood Valuation Partners? What do they do?
It's a boutique business valuation firm. So we do anything business valuation related, from business valuations for tax purposes, like gift and estate tax purposes, or when you need the charitable donations, then you need a valuation as well, or for financial reporting purposes, for GAAP or IFRS purpose valuations. And we also do valuations for litigation support, as well as strategic planning purposes as well.
Okay. So the people who normally hire you are individuals, maybe professionals like CPAs or lawyers, who are doing some sort of a transaction. Is that fair?
That's correct.
Okay. But you only do business valuations. So you don't value real estate, you don't value stocks, you don't value like cars, you value businesses. Is that fair?
That's correct. Yeah. So we don't value real estates or any type of fixed assets. We value businesses or some sort of financial instruments that are available. Then that's something we can definitely value.
Okay. Well, most of the people who are listening might think, why in the world do you care about that? Right. When you say you're valuing for the purposes of a transaction. So walk us through, I do trusts and I do estate planning, but we help a lot of clients who have a higher net worth. Help us understand where you come in to a whole kind of estate planning process.
We can come in either very early stage or very last stage of that process. We can come in to let the a business owner know how much is the interest that they have for tax planning purposes, so that they can decide how much would be gifted to their family members, whatnot.
Mhm.
Or we can come in much later when everything is determined, all the transaction documents are already in place. Then we come in later. What was the value of the transfer as of that transfer date, so that you can file your tax returns?
Okay, so if I'm hearing you correctly, from the perspective of some sort of a trust or tax planning, you're involved in two different stages. And so let's just talk about the stages of a tax plan. Okay, let me just lay it out at the beginning. Someone comes to an attorney like me, or maybe a CPA or some other financial professional, and says, okay, I want to move things. I want to start giving things out of my estate to give away. It's going to be a very popular thing to do next year. But someone's going to give something away to try to avoid paying tax on it in the future. And so they come in during the planning phase. If they're going to plan to give something away, you have to look ahead to see what sort of tools or what sort of implements you might use to give things away in an efficient manner. I don't mean efficient like it doesn't take much time. I mean that you're giving things away in a tax efficient manner to try to maximize the value of every tax dollar that you can save. Hong, what you're saying is that at the beginning phase, you might be used, or your services might be used to try to value that asset at that time, and that might be stage number one. Then later, after all these mechanisms have been drafted, the attorneys have drafted all these tools, the CPA has done all the planning, the financial advisor has done all the prospectus, the attorney has done all the documentation, and documents have actually been signed. You come in later to actually value the interest for the purposes of reporting. Is that fair?
That's correct. So we are not obviously as tax experts like the CPAs or tax attorneys, but our service provides them an insight how to efficiently make that transfer happen. And then we come in to finalize that transfer.
Okay, that's fair. Before we go into that, because there's a lot there, okay, and I just want to be really clear with people that Hong's services are extremely valuable, but they are a piece of an overall puzzle, right? Let's talk about you because you're a person, right? You work at a business and you have a blurred background, and that's okay. But what do you do in your spare time? Do you have any hobbies?
Um, I try to read a lot of non-business books.
Hmm.
I actually read a lot of non-business books, fictions and non-fictions. But
Yeah.
that's one area I'm trying to sort of develop myself
Okay.
into reading business books, because as I'm going up this corporate ladder, this career ladder, it's something definitely helpful, and you don't always find help among the people around you kindly. So I think picking the brains of the smart people who have written those books is definitely helpful. But other than that, I spend a lot of my time playing with or dealing with my 9-year-old daughter, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. What activities is she into? My kids are in taekwondo and dance. So, what sort of things does your daughter do?
She does ballet, and also she's into choir. I think many parents around here do the same. We shuffle the kids around and do my readings during the drive or in the car while waiting for the session to be finished.
Yeah, the funny thing that happened last week was I was sitting there on my phone listening to a book, but I left the AC on in the car and the battery drained.
Oh,
So I was sitting at the dance studio, behind the dance studio with a dead battery, waiting for the guy to come. And the kids come out and they say, "Dad, what's wrong with the car?" "Yeah, I drained the battery."
oh, so bad. Was it that hot steaming week? Was it?
No, it was just that just the AC was on in the car and I forgot to turn it off. And I turned off the car, but I had just left that AC on for some reason. It was just stupid. I was just looking into a book and I was engrossed, right?
That's good. Oh, well, that's good. Yeah, yeah. The book took you away, so yeah,
Yeah.
that happens.
Yeah. Yeah. I noticed here before people come on the podcast, we asked them to fill out some questions. So you just filled out discounts on the questions. You said, "Elijah, I want to talk about discounts." So let's talk about those. So what is a valuation discount?
It's something people, you know, before I talk about discount, I think maybe one thing I want to stress is there are different standards of values. And when we are talking about tax purpose valuations, we're talking about fair market value.
Okay.
And in fair market value, there are different levels of values, whether it's
Right.
control basis value or minority but marketable basis value or minority and non-marketable value. So those are adjustments, different levels of values that an ownership interest in business can be based on. And
Okay.
yeah,
So
and yeah.
let me interrupt you just one phase there. Let's talk about one of those, just one, and explain why there's some differing value between two different things. Okay. So let's give one situation. There's a company and there's two owners, and one person, and the way that they control this company is that the majority share, the person that has 51% makes all the decisions. And why is the 49% value, is that lower than the 51% value? Pro rata. So if the company is worth, I don't know, $1 million, the 51% value, the 49% value, you might say that the 49% value is worth 490,000 because it's 49% of a million. But would you say that it could be worth less than $490,000, and why?
Yeah, exactly. That's the point I'm trying to make. It's because the minority shareholder the minority interest in that company is subject to additional discount because the minority shareholder doesn't have any control of the company. So his bucket of interest is less attractive than
Yeah.
the 51% bucket.
Okay.
And also because we're talking about a privately held company where there isn't a market available just when you're buying publicly traded stock.
Right.
So because of that, on top of lack of control, there is additional discount due to the marketability or lack thereof.
Okay. So if I hear you correctly, what you're saying is that a company that is owned by multiple people, that the interest of each person might be different, that the actual sale value to a third party, which is what we use for determining the value for the purposes of planning, that value might be different than the actual pro rata portion of the fair market value of that business.
That's correct.
So that $1 million business, what you're saying is that $490,000, it has discounts. It's the value, according to the IRS, is lower than 490 because that person is not in a good position to sell to a valid third-party investor.
That's correct. That's correct. That's precisely correct.
So so when you're saying discount, that investor, somebody coming into a company, that they might not want to buy a portion of that company for the actual value that person owns simply because it's not an attractive investment, because they might not be able to say what they want to say. They might not have control over what they want to control, or they might not even be able to easily sell their interest to a third party.
Right, right. And that discounts are a significant amount that it might be depending on what the business does, what kind of asset it holds, the discount could be a significant amount, which is why there's always these lawsuits that happen when the valuation is get audited by the IRS. A lot of stress goes into the discounts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Hong mentioned discount. So a discount valuation, in my mind, to explain it in a very simple way, is if you take an asset and divide it between multiple people, the manner of control and the ownership interest of each individual part of that asset is now slightly less than the whole. Because if you look at a third party who's coming into this environment, might be able to play the people off of each other, or they might not want to pay full fair market value to this specific piece of a business, because the way that the business is structured in such a way so that this one portion is worth far less than what the rest of the business is, because the person who owns it is in a much worse spot.
Right. Correct. Precisely. Yeah.
The reason why I use business valuations quite often, or valuations of real estate, is for two reasons. Number one, to understand the actual value of things that are being transferred, because my job is to help with control issues, but also help transfer things between people, right? We're going to move things back and forth. But also, secondly, to try to do that in a way so that we save as much money as possible, right? If somebody owns a business, they could just give it to the kids. That's fine. Give it to the kids. Good. But if we structure that business in a slightly different way, then the IRS will say, well, according to this business valuation, Hong says that the business is actually worth 2/3 of what it actually earns, right? If you're taking a multiple, you can value it in a lot of ways, but Hong might be able to see discounts of a different amount, and therefore the family pays less tax when they transfer it. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct. And it doesn't have to be just a minority interest. Some can be structured through a sale or a combination of a transfer and a sale. Those creativity is always there. And that all depends on the valuation, how the corporate was structured before it came to the valuation court.
Right. So the benefit of a skilled lawyer or a skilled CPA or a skilled advisor who's able to design that is understanding what the valuations might be and how to manufacture them. Is that what you're saying?
That's right.
Yeah. So manufacturing a valuation basically means that we have to plan ahead and we have to actually structure things in a certain way. What I mean by structure is that we have to create companies, we have to create holdings, we have to have different ownership, we have to have different methods of control. We have to do things in a certain way which is completely and totally invisible to the mass public. But we have to do it in a way so that we can limit the amount of money paid to the government. Is that the core of what we're talking about?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's tax efficient transfer that we
Right.
are talking about.
Right.
Right. So that's why we always review when we do the analysis is not actually on top of the financials is the operating agreement of the company. We always go through line by line, word by word, just to make sure what are the terms of, say, who has the control of the operation, day-to-day operation, who has the control of hiring those managers, who has the control of who decides on the terms or dissolution of the company. That's one thing we definitely try to review. And other things we review are what are the terms of withdrawal, marketability of ownership interest in the company. And those things, you cannot just, we highly suggest people not to do any cookie cutter agreement you see online and use that for your business as an operating agreement, because those will matter a great deal later on, especially if your company is going to be successful.
Right. So when you said cookie cutter agreements, does that mean like someone going through LegalZoom or some online source? There's nothing wrong with those. But what you're saying is that all those provisions in there matter. They have some impact on your work. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. So it has to be, and every situation is different. Maybe a bulk of the situations are applicable using those cookie cutter, boilerplate languages, but every situation can be customized for your needs. For your, you may have one kid, but you may have more than one kid, and you got to plan for what may happen down the road, and those things matter.
Right. That's interesting. It's interesting that you say that cookie cutter versus non-cookie cutter, because most people who I interact with as a professional don't really know the general effect of what they're doing when they sign documents. They only know that they're signing a document that's supposed to do X. And it sounds to me like what you're saying is that each of the provisions or paragraphs in a trust or in a business agreement has an effect beyond what it actually says there, right? That there's a series of dominoes that it hits. And if someone's really concerned about the dominoes, then they have to find someone who actually understands how the dominoes work. Is that clear?
Yeah, exactly. Even starting with our engagement letter, one thing we always ask in at the tax planning purpose valuations is, do you want us to sign a cover letter with your attorney just to make sure? You never know. And that's something some people who actually haven't even thought about that.
Right.
Because they thought, hey, I'm the taxpayer anyway. Yeah, but if you have an attorney who is helping you with the transfer, you might as well.
Yeah. So Hong said that there's a lot of different ways to work with his company, but sometimes when people come and they hire him, the question that he's asked here is, do you want me to send the cover letter or to sign it with your attorney so that your attorney is on board with the valuation, or do you want it to be separate? There actually might be situations where you don't want the attorney involved at all. There might be situations, especially if I've created the corporate structure, or if I'm doing the transfer, you probably don't want me involved with Hong in any way, because you want the IRS. If I'm mentioned in the cover letter in any way, then the IRS might say, Hong and I colluded and we talked about this. And now Hong is no longer a third-party evaluation expert, right? He's now doing what I told him to do. But if I set up the structure and you have me and I told you to go to Hong, but I'm completely silent, I have no involvement at all, at least I'm completely silent as to Hong's written advice to you, then Hong's valuation is probably a lot stronger to the IRS, right? That doesn't mean that Hong and I couldn't work in another way, right? There's two different types of valuation reports, right, Hong? There's a verbal and there's a written. So talk us through that.
Well, it's more of analysis versus a calculation versus a report, I would say. A report is, we have an assumption that a reviewer or whoever reads the report needs to be informed of what's going on with the analysis in detail. And the biggest difference between the calculation of that and the report is that we're going to opine of the value regarding the value in the report. In the calculation, it's usually made of the schedules that we do the analysis, but we don't necessarily opine on the conclusion of the value.
Okay. But in a written opinion, right, you're issuing a written opinion, you're giving a valuation, you're putting your reputation on the line. You are telling the IRS, this is what I recommend, this is what I find. Is that fair?
And that I stand by it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I've had plenty of times that there have been valuations. I can't say specifically which ones because that would make the valuation null. But there have been times when the evaluator, the certified appraiser, has called my office and has said, hey, These are our findings. Do you want to report yourself? And my answer is, can you just tell me what the report is? Sure. So they tell me what the report is and they say, do you want a written report? And my answer is no. I would like a written opinion of that, please. And at that point, then they say, thank you very much. They hang up the phone and they write a written opinion. And now I have heard what the opinion is, but I have also been able to tell the appraiser, I don't know if I like that opinion very much. Is there another way you can look at that calculation? And in that way, your attorney and your appraiser can work together, but it's very extremely important that the appraiser be given the latitude and the ability to do what the appraiser thinks is right, because the appraiser knows a heck of a lot more about appraisals than I do.
And that's where our professional standards come in too.
Yep.
We follow what's called USPAP in the valuation space, and according to that, we basically our fees cannot be dependent on the outcome of the value. So one thing we are trying to do, at least in our firm, is that we require payment of the invoice, which is on fixed fee, prior to the delivery of the final report, just to make sure that, hey, this is our process. Our product is independent of the fee estimate.
Yeah. So let's differentiate then two different people who both offer valuation reports. One of them, which is acceptable according to the IRS, one of them is not. Okay. So let's take the example of a business broker, right? The business broker is going to negotiate a deal between two parties, and they can find similar deals online through online reporting to show maybe they're at a big brokerage company and the brokerage company has some data internally, or they can pull some data from a report and they will find the same information that you would find. Why can't we use the business broker's valuation for the IRS?
Business brokers usually isn't based on the standard of value that's suitable for the IRS. Purpose valuations are all under the standard of value called fair market value. Okay. It's based on hypothetical buyer and hypothetical seller with reasonable understanding of the company and with the information access, basically.
Right.
So under that definition, there's a certain things that you wouldn't find an investment value or an investor wouldn't do. And those business brokers prepare analysis of a company based on investment value, which is assuming the other party will be willing to totally rip off the company and restructure everything so that it fits what they think, what they envision the company should be.
Right. There's also another point, and I remember hearing this not so much in business brokerages, but with real estate, where the real estate appraiser doesn't care what the value is. They just care what the report, they just care that they prepare a proper report, right? It doesn't matter to them whether the person likes it or whether the person doesn't. They just want to prepare an honest report. But a broker is actually trying to influence sale behavior. They're trying to get someone to do something, right? Because the broker isn't paid based upon the valuation is free. The broker is based upon the completed sale, meaning that the valuation is not a neutral assessment. The valuation is now an influence, a sales mechanism to try to influence someone to sell.
Right, exactly. Something we business appraisers will not do is, if you acquire our client's company, you could structure it this way. You can let go of all the HR people because you already have HR people in your existing company. You can combine them together. You can you can improve your profit margin that way. We don't do any of those storytelling. What could happen in the future? We still do the storytelling ourselves, but it's on very neutral basis if this company continues on its basis, on a going concern basis.
So what you're talking about is you're talking about the difference between an equity investor and a fair market buyer. So I don't want to go too far into this because it goes pretty far afield to what we're talking about here. But an equity company is going to buy another business, not because of its present value, but because they think that they can buy it and they can make it better in one or two, maybe even three very specific ways, and by so doing, earn more money. Is that right?
That's correct. That's one difficulty we have actually when we are dealing with discounts for lack of control, because we look at actual transactions happened and try to see what was the price premium paid for acquiring a certain company. And that premium, in theory, should include control premium, or which could then also mean discount for lack of control. But more often than not, they also include synergistic or strategic premium in the pricing that is a step up in value on top of a control basis value, so that they are first trying to close the deal and convince the seller to sell the companies, but they are also thinking, oh, we can pay up to this amount because we can restructure this company acquired to fit our needs.
So what you're saying then is that someone might offer more than what fair market value is because they think that the company can be worth more, and so they're going to pay a higher value. That is not an appraisal. That is a business deal where somebody says, I can earn double what you can earn now, so I'm willing to pay you 110% so that I can get 200 back. Is that
Right.
what you're saying? But
That's
what you're
right.
saying is that your value is only based upon the present state. You're not looking at the future. You're not looking at the past. You're looking at a snapshot today. This is what the value is. And based upon the current circumstances, however things are held, however things are arranged between the different controllers, you are valuing this as of today.
We are still looking what's going to happen in the future, but we are assuming the current management projections is going to stay with the current operations and the current staff on a going concern basis.
Right.
Because valuation exercise is always present value exercise in the end. Yeah. So we are always forward looking, trying to see what's going to happen, but we assume that whatever is currently in plan is the target for the company. It's not some third party coming in additional capital that we cannot foresee. And that way, it's in a way that is more relatively toned down and more neutral valuation.
Okay. But so there are some people who are listening to this podcast who will completely gel with what you're saying, right? And they'll understand very clearly because they're in that business space, but there are other people who will not. Okay. So after having spoken for, I don't know, about half an hour, can you just give a simple 2-line explanation of what you do?
We try to value what your business is worth.
Okay.
Right.
To just a general buyer who's going to buy it, who's just going to
Well,
approach you as a stranger.
right. Our target audience is always going to be IRS or accounting firms, accounting bodies, but
Right.
both are in the underlying assumption of both reporting is that hypothetical buyer and hypothetical seller with reasonable basis and information with understanding and information of the company.
Uh-huh. Oh, that's good. All right. So I noticed here that your favorite book, let's change tack here. Then you noticed here that your favorite book is Shoe Dog. I've never heard of that book before. What's that?
It's a book by Phil Knight, the person who founded Nike.
Okay.
And he made that it's very interesting because all he seemed like he wanted to do was run and make good shoes for him to run.
Mhm.
That was his focus, and that turned out to be a huge conglomerate in the end in the sports arena. And it's a book that I actually recommend to all my junior staff who were just hired from school, because it's a book that's very energizing, entrepreneurial, and then it just tells you have to do what you want to do and focus on that. And then if you work really hard on it, then others will sort of fall into pieces.
It's really good. I remember listening to a business podcast. I don't remember which one it was. The person who was speaking was quoting the president of Nike. And the president of Nike was standing at a business conference. Someone asked him who his customer is. Who's your target customer? And he turned to the audience, who was just, I don't know, 300-400 people. And he said, how many of you here have run for exercise? And maybe 3/4 of people stood up. And he said, how many of you have run for exercise in the last month? And some of them sat down. How many of you have run for exercise in the last week? And a lot of them sat down. And he said, how many of you exercise 3 times a week? How many of you run for exercise 3 times a week? and very few people were standing. He said, how many of you run 3 to 4 times a week, rain or shine, light or dark, it doesn't matter, and you're out there in the pavement no matter what? And there were out of the entire room, there were 5 people standing, just over 1%. And he said, you are my customers. And I am the one standing underneath the streetlight at 5 a.m. when it's raining and no one is there to help you. I'm the one cheering you on. And that is an ideal focus for his company, right? That's what Nike is. Nike is there cheering you on. What is your ideal focus?
My ideal focus is just, that's a good question. I would say it's just the clients that need a reasonable valuation in a way.
Mhm.
Yeah, because I think it's important. We understand what we do is a client service. It's a customer service in the end. But we also want to make sure that we cannot entertain all the asks. We also want to be the one educating the clients just to make sure that whatever we produce will be helpful for them and provide blanket for them in the future that they may not understand. Anybody, basically, any person who is planning for a transfer of their business interest or forming a business in plan for the transfer is definitely something I can help with.
Yeah. I remember listening to what that story was from Nike, and I tried to apply it to my business. And I decided that my business is actually in the space of doing advanced crisis management. So when someone is going to be in crisis in the future, whether it be a financial crisis, a healthcare crisis, a control crisis, or a monetary crisis, my business is the advanced crisis manager. So we use contracts to avoid those crises in the future. And along the way, once that crisis is abated, once it's over, then we maximize financial protections. But the core of what we do is to avoid the crisis, right? Because when someone comes in and they say, hey, Elijah, I have a net worth of X amount, and I want to avoid estate taxes, my first question is, do you have all the basics down? Do you have a living trust? Do you have trust for your children? Do you have a good healthcare power of attorney? Do you have a good financial power of attorney? I don't have any of that. That's where we start. We start there because it's far more likely that you're going to die or that you're going to need protection than we need to protect the next generation because that's money. Money is important, but your safety is much more important. And keeping your children from eating each other, from attacking each other, from just going full bore to take advantage of each other is far more important than just the transfer of money.
Oh yeah, been there.
You've seen your fair share of families that have completely deconstructed and everybody's trying to take as much as they can, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's very disheartening. Yeah.
Yeah, it's frustrating. I remember telling a story to someone and they got really confused when I told them that Prince, the artist formerly known as Prince, he died in Minnesota. He died in 2016. He died without a will or without a trust. And when he died, his assets were valued at about $300 million fair market value. But with discounts that the appraisers, such as yourself, were able to apply, the valuation was reduced to 156 million. So 300 million down to 156 million. They're still arguing, the siblings. There were 6 siblings. The most recently filed suit that I saw was filed in April of this year. Maybe there have been other ones. But they're still fighting over assets, and they're fighting because some of the assets were discounted more than others. And so in the probate out of Hennepin County, Minnesota, some siblings are getting $1 million that's actually worth 3, and some of the siblings are getting $1 million that's worth $1 million. And everybody is fighting over all the stuff, and they're still fighting 8 years later.
It's just painful. Yeah, some cases are just too painful.
Yeah, it's too bad. Yeah. Well, Hong, it's been really nice to talk to you today. I really appreciate your time. If someone wants to find you, if they're actually interested in a business valuation, how do they find you and your company?
Yeah, so they can always contact me through my email. It's hong@redwoodvaluation.com. And our website is redwoodvaluation.com, and you can see more about the company, our staff there. We have very good set of partners and directors who can cover a wide range of different business valuation needs, and then we can start from there.
And you only do business valuations. Someone wants to value stock or real estate, they don't come to you. Is that right?
Stock, what do you mean? Stock, it's something we can help with if it's company stock. But real estate, no. We do work with a lot of real estate holding companies,
Okay.
but we always rely on a third-party real estate appraisal before we value our ownership interest in that company.
Okay, let me go back to that because we actually have a lot of clients who are real estate holding companies. So my firm sets up quite a few LLCs to hold real estate investments as rentals or holding companies. And so what you're saying is that in order to value that LLC, what my clients would do is that they would actually go and they would have an independent appraisal of each individual piece of real estate, hand that to you, and you would use that as one factor, not the entire thing, but one piece of the puzzle when valuing the company interest that holds the real estate. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct. And we looked at what type of the real property that is, whether it's residential, multifamily, commercial, or industrial, and whether there's any lease agreement that will help us to determine the discounts that we discussed today, whether it's discount for lack of control or marketability.
Yeah. You mentioned a lot of these discounts, and I don't want to go too far into them, but just to explain it very simply, that there are certain ways, again, that the company can be held that will actually lower the value to other people. Is that what you're saying? Discount valuation. I know we said that before, but I just want to be really clear.
If you're a minority shareholder, yes.
Minority shareholder. So 51 versus 49%.
Right. Or let's say if you're a limited partnership interest holder of 99%, where there is a separate general partner of 1%, then that 99% also can be subject to different lack of control and marketability.
So the 99% limited partner means that they have limited ability to transfer and control. That person's share is now worth less than 99% of fair market because they don't have control, they don't decide what happens, and because they can't sell it.
That's right.
Very good. All right. Well, Hong, it's been really nice talking to you today. Hong and I know each other from a networking group, and I'm really glad that you came on. It's nice to see you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Any final thoughts, questions, concerns?
No, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you, and we should actually meet more in person and do this over.
I think so. We'll have lunch soon. Well, this is, thank you so much for joining us. This has been Keys to Your Legacy. I'm Elijah Keys. Again, a podcast that focuses on trust and estates issues. If you reached this far in the podcast, thank you so much for listening. Go ahead and give us a like and follow. You can follow us wherever you can find podcasts. I think that's Amazon, Spotify, Apple, and follow along. Go ahead and subscribe so that we can help you develop the keys to your legacy. Thanks so much.
You've been tuning into The Keys to Your Legacy with your host, Elijah Keys. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, keyslawgroup.com. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.